Eli Drinkwitz has it all at Missouri, except a championship.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, I want to talk to you about, Missouri basketball and who I think the best five lineup is for the Tigers, also the likely reserves, at least from my vantage point. Before that, going to get to some injury updates on Bo Prabula and Brett Norfleet. But I'm going to start the show by talking about Eli Drinkwitz and also reminding you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And I'll just say this, when it comes to powerful people, rich people, from my experience, they want things that are very short on a list. Among them, money and power. And Eli Drinkwitz, frankly, has both money and power at the University of Missouri. He's tied for the 10th highest paid coach in the country. And, of course, with all of the coaching carousel speculation happening around the country right now, the latest being at LSU, where Brian Kelly just got fired down in Baton Rouge. So, of course, the natural step is that lots of people at Florida and LSU and all of these different places, even places like Penn State in the Big Ten, Eli Drinkwitz's name is going to come up. And because, again, money and power, I don't think money is going to be an issue whatsoever. And that's just using really simple common sense here. If you're going to spend $250 million sprucing up the north end of your football stadium, I don't think you're going to cheap out on putting a little extra cheese on the coach's Whopper. If indeed that is if that's what's required to keep Eli Drinkwitz happy, then so be it. So money's not going to be an issue, and guess what? Power's not an issue either. Eli Drinkwitz, I'd say, already won a power struggle perhaps with a previous athletic director, and for all intents and purposes, Eli Drinkwitz is the most powerful man at the university, not just the athletic program at this point. So if he's got the money and he's got the power, the third variable, in my opinion, is quite simply this. Does Eli Drinkwitz think he can win a national championship at Missouri? I think the answer to that question is yes. What does Eli Drinkwitz think? I think he thinks yes, too, if I had to pump him full of sodium pentothal. But I would also say the same thing, by the way, about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, by the way, which is why I don't think it's a slam dunk that Lane leaves Ole Miss either, especially with that huge win over Oklahoma on Saturday. By the way, I think that's a little bit of proof of concept that, Lane Kiffin can win a national championship at Ole Miss. Just because he hasn't made the playoff yet, just because Lane has never won a championship at Ole Miss yet, just because he hasn't won the big one, as the criticism often is of people like, by the way, LeBron James and Michael Jordan and Peyton Manning and lots of other greats of all time in sports that couldn't win the big one until somehow they could win the big one. Andy Reid actually is a good example who comes to mind, a guy who could never win the big one, and now all of a sudden he's got 3 big ones on that big hand of his. So to all the people out there who are sort of complaining a little bit and who are understandably frustrated, I would say, after a heartbreaking loss where Missouri literally lost by a half a yard, if you want to look at it that way. Obviously, there's frustration here, but let's not let that frustration spill over into bad thinking here. And that's thinking that, just because somebody hasn't won the big one, that means that they can't win it in the future. If the complaint is that, Drinkwitz has mostly just beaten the teams that he should beat, in my humble opinion, history tells you that that's actually an important step in college football history. You got to beat those teams that you're supposed to beat, as mostly Gary Pinkel did at one point in his career before finally taking that next step and thrashing the Nebraskas and Texases and Oklahomas of the world, as Pinkel did a little bit later in his Missouri run. So the thing is, to me, I just think that the difference between Ole Miss and Florida, for example, and Missouri and Florida, sure, you want to tell me that all things being equal, Florida's a better job, I'd have a tough time disagreeing with you. But the point is it enough of a better job to take that kind of risk, leave a place that you've already been established? Whether you're Lane Kiffin or Eli Drinkwitz, by the way, I think these are good comparisons here, so you know I'm not just being a complete homer here. Maybe I am projecting my own values onto Lane Kiffin in Missouri, and my values here being I'd be a little bit risk averse here if I were those guys. That's just me. Maybe they're different. Maybe the glitz and possible glamour of, say, LSU, for instance, might be too much for one of these men to resist. We shall see. The point here is I would not have been this confident or had this type of take even as soon as 5 years ago. A lot has changed in this amount of time, but I will say this. Am I overly confident? Am I betting my life savings on either one of those guys staying at Ole Miss or Missouri respectively forever? Well, no, I'm not. You can't rule anything out in this crazy world of college football, and especially talking about things that I wouldn't have thought a few years ago. Well, I wouldn't have thought that $54 million buyouts, which is what Brian Kelly is getting, to just go walk away from LSU right now. I wouldn't have thought that was going to be possible a few years ago either, but here we are in this post-Jimbo Fisher world. I just want to say the can't win the big one argument always falls a little bit flat for me. If you want to give me a reason why you think it's not going to happen, by all means, we can discuss that. Whatever perceived negatives or just whatever it might be. We can have those type of discussions, but just this blanket statement to say that somebody who hasn't won the big one, that means that therefore they can't win the big one. Again, I think Big Red down in Kansas City Chiefs country says that very much is not always the case. And despite Missouri's loss to Vanderbilt and falling a few spots in both polls, well, Missouri is still getting the special treatment, I guess you'd say, the 2:30 ABC kickoff for the home game against Texas A&M. So an exciting one in Columbia coming up here in just under a couple of weeks. And by the way, of course, on Missouri football, I do have some pretty major injury news to share with you about Bo Pribula and maybe even more importantly, Brett Norfleet at this point, coming up on the show here in just a minute. But you know what? Before I get there, I do have to tell you about Gametime, because with college football in full swing, you got to be excited about it. But what I'm not excited about it is sitting in endless queues, fighting through hidden fees at checkout, prices jumping at checkout with said fees. Well, that's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Not only are they completely upfront about pricing with no surprise fees, my favorite feature is zone deals, where you get to pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you get to save big by being a little bit flexible. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. All right, PowerMizzou.com had an update this morning on Brett Norfleet. Quote, a source told PowerMizzou.com Norfleet suffered a dislocated shoulder. The source did not share a timeline for Norfleet's possible return. So a real downer bit of news there from Power Mizzou, a dislocated shoulder for Norfleet. Again, I won't even begin to speculate on his timeline for a return. I would just say that obviously at the very least a Texas A&M return would sound like it's very much in doubt at this point. I just feel bad for Brett there, a guy who seemed like he was going to have a breakout season this year and still might, has played very well, but man, just another shoulder problem after suffering one early in the 2024 campaign as well. Seems like that might be a bit of a lingering issue for Norfleet in his football career. Hopefully it's just bad luck, though, and we can move on from there. But obviously less than ideal news there for Missouri. In response, after the first part of that game where Norfleet played, well, Jordan Harris's snaps went up, as you might expect. But, of course, Jude James really came in and, well, really played the Brett Norfleet role as the receiving tight end, I would say, and obviously had 4 catches. Importantly, had a fourth and 2 touchdown, or maybe it was from the 2, 4th and goal, whatever it was. It was 4th down and a touchdown from Matt Zollers to Jude James. Those two seem to have some type of chemistry there for sure. And by the way, CBS Sports, Matt Zenitz, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but what do I know? I gave it a shot. But Matt says an update on Bo Pribula, by the way, as well. Further testing on Pribula's ankle injury revealed a bad sprain and ligament damage, but no surgery necessary, and there's maybe even an outside chance he could return during the regular season, sources tell CBS Sports. So from my understanding, that's fairly fortunate, I would say. It's pretty rare for a dislocated ankle for there to not be any ligament damage, that type of deal, or certainly any broken bones in addition. So really about as good of an outcome for Bo Pribula in Missouri as you could have hoped there. It sounds like after he had an obvious ankle dislocation that was, I think, easy enough for the Missouri training staff to diagnose on the field, but obviously further imaging revealed some pretty good news for Bo there. So that's a good thing. I will say you got to put a heavy emphasis on there's maybe even an outside chance that he could return during the regular season. I don't know that I would put a ton of hope into that for sure because, well, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, obviously Pribula is going to need to be healthy enough to play and be effective. And secondly, will Missouri actually need Bo Pribula? And well, I mean that on a couple different levels too. That, of course, depends on how Matt Zollers is playing, number one. And number two, it depends on where Missouri is in the season. Fair to say Missouri is now 1 loss away from being 100% eliminated from contention for the college football playoff. So if it's late in the season, maybe Missouri has a loss or two more on the schedule here. You're playing Arkansas the last game of the season. Is it really worth it to put Pribula out there, for example, for a shot at the Music City Bowl, for example? Based on how this program has played non-BCS type bowl games, well, there you go. I just think that question kind of answers itself. And, of course, with all of the turmoil and the coaching carousel unfolding before our very eyes and ears, it was asked in my SEC group chat with all the hosts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I think it was Chris Gordy, host of Locked On SEC, by the way, who threw out who actually likes their coach in the SEC. Well, based on that tone, you know what? I wasn't expecting very many to be in that category. But I got to say, when I looked at it and marked it down, at least in my column, I think half the league actually likes their coach, believe it or not. And while that sounds like a fairly high number, it felt like in this previous offseason, there was hardly any coaches that were on the hot seat whatsoever. So in fact, yes, the zero-sum game that college football is brings the heat one way or the other. But in terms of who actually likes their coach, obviously Missouri likes their coach. They want to keep Eli Drinkwitz around for the foreseeable future. Mike Elko and Texas A&M, hey, despite week one when it seemed like Alabama fans were ready to shove Kalen DeBoer out the door, possibly. You got to say Alabama at this point, without a doubt. There's 3 teams. Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss certainly makes 4. Kirby Smart and Georgia 5. Vanderbilt and Clark Lee, that's pretty obvious, 6. Texas, I know they've struggled a little bit this year, but come on. I think they're okay with Sark at this point. And then Josh Heupel and Tennessee. Fair to say that all things are pretty rosy in Knoxville at this point. That's an easy half the league, though. But then the other half of the league, it's really not even debatable. For as much as that first half wasn't debatable, other than Mississippi State and Jeff Lebby, I would say that's the only one where I'm going, wait, it does Mississippi? Are they happy with him or not? I'd say there's got to be a real debate down in Starkville. But the rest, at the very least, have already fired their head coaches, and others are, I would say, at the very least, on shaky ground. Certainly Brent Venables for Oklahoma is on shaky ground. I just don't know that you can't say that Oklahoma fans are happy with him. I just can't go that far. Obviously, Florida's fired their coach. LSU's fired their coach. Auburn is likely to fire their coach at the end of the season. South Carolina, I don't know, man. Shane Beamer, I had to do it. Shane Beamer probably maybe on his way out. You can't say that the Gamecocks fans are happy with him. Arkansas fired their coach. Kentucky is dead last in the league. Mark Stoops' seat is certainly hot. So really the rest of it, other than Mississippi State, not exactly a bucket or not exactly a bucket of happy thoughts. Nice analogy. Well done there, John. But regardless, what is the best job on the market? To me, it's got to be LSU or Penn State. And if you just want to play armchair agent for a second for Eli Drinkwitz, Florida, for example. Again, I just don't see it as enough of an upgrade to account for the risk. And also staying in the SEC, by the way, either. I don't think Drinkwitz is a guy who wants to be disliked in Columbia, Missouri. That would make it tougher. I also think that LSU, though, just would be more difficult to turn down. So Penn State, hey, at least you could get out of the SEC, go to a major team in a big conference. Auburn, by the way, there's no chance. He's not going to Auburn, just reading between the lines. I think you noticed Eli's reaction after beating Auburn this past couple weeks ago down on the plains. I think Drinkwitz is much more likely to want to continue to stick it to the Auburn Tigers much more than he is likely to go down there. I just don't see any chance that happens whatsoever. But again, I'm not hearing anybody involved with Missouri that thinks Drinkwitz is going to leave. So let's just stick with that for now and focus on the rest of this football season. But you know what? I want to change my focus to a basketball for the rest of the program. I want to tell you who I think best 5 is, at least so far, based on, well, just one game, obviously, one exhibition game, by the way. But I think I can gather quite a bit from it. So let's talk some hoops moving forward here to close out the program. First, I do want to tell you that, yes, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And even if you miss the start of the game or you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to a fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you could even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And speaking of the NBA, well, walking off the bus, at least, as it were, Missouri kind of looks like an NBA team this season. Lots of size, that's for darn sure. So I still have my questions about how good of a defensive team Missouri is going to be this season. Well, obviously securing the defensive rebound goes a long way to being a good defensive team. And as long as Missouri isn't constantly scrambling and getting itself out of position, size really should not be a problem, obviously. So hopefully this is a good defensive rebounding team. That's one thing I'll say. And certainly Sean Phillips looks like a heck of a defensive rebounder and just a finisher on the inside, along with Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell. Those are the three obvious best players on the team right now. I'm not even sure it's close, just based on, well, obviously what I saw last year from Ant and from Mitchell, but even Phillips, just in the short bit that I've seen from him and also just what everybody talked about him in the offseason, it was just nice to see it from my own eyes and confirm that this is a guy who is just an absolute athletic beast on the inside, and it's going to be a real problem even in what is a traditional, very athletic league that is the Southeastern Conference in basketball. So you already had a really good start, in my opinion, with Anthony Robinson, your lead guard, Mark Mitchell, a very versatile forward. Then Phillips now, I think, just one of your absolute problems in the paint in the Southeastern Conference. Just a really good finisher around the rim, a guy who should be really good defensively too. I think Sebastian Mack should almost be the transfer from UCLA. I sort of see him as almost the Trey Go-Million of this year's team, a guy who's going to provide a lot of energy, but not just energy, a lot of good offense too, but provide in a lot of different ways. He may not be the 40% three-point shooter. He can still knock down some shots, but I think you're going to see him providing a lot of energy and offense and sort of maybe some more traditional ways that isn't just, hey, pace and space and stand in the corner, that type of deal. More cutting, more driving to the basket from Sebastian Mack, and a lot of energy defensively too. And then finally, I think Missouri's best five, just based on what I've seen so far, I think it's got to include Honor Boateng. And to me, I hope I'm not overreacting here. And I don't think I am, because of the quality of the opponent, the size of the opponent, the athletic upside of the opponent in Kansas State. I just thought everything Honor Boateng did is translatable for the rest of the season. I just see a guy who had a lot of size and athletic talent, just a piece of clay that needed to be molded a little bit offensively. And who better than Dennis Gates and his staff, who's shown a great ability to mold players offensively. So if Boateng has really taken this offseason seriously and taken a step forward like it sure seemed like he did this past Friday night, I'm really starting to feel more confident about this Missouri team. I think if I'm right, I think their upside just got a heck of a lot higher. Now, as far as the bench goes, bench pieces, and I'll say bench pieces at least, because Jaden Stone is a guy who maybe he'll work his way into the starting five or the finishing five, whatever you want to call it. But I think at the very least, he's going to be a player for Missouri, and he's going to be a scorer off the bench and is going to play some serious minutes for Missouri. Same deal with T.O. Barrett, even though he has a different skill set, maybe closer to Anthony Robinson's skill set. Certainly he's more of a point guard type, but a point guard type with really, really good size. He should be a defensive menace once again. And Barrett, I don't just mean size height-wise. It seemed like he really has filled out this offseason too. So as long as he keeps his foot speed, which it seems like he did to me at first glance, boy, he's going to be even tougher to beat off the dribble for lead guards in this league. So again, bench piece at least for T.O. Barrett. There might be times where you throw him out there with Anthony Robinson, and maybe that's the best combination you have for that night, for example. I think Jacob Cruz, obviously another guy who's going to play minutes for Missouri, started in the ball game on Friday. Didn't play his best game, but he's a guy Dennis Gates likes, and this team does need some shooting for sure. I think Cruz is definitely going to get some minutes. Same thing with Trent Pierce, if and when he's healthy this season. And finally, Javon Porter, a guy who didn't have a great game on Friday, but I think he's a versatile enough piece that he's going to find his way into some minutes, either at the 4, the 5, maybe even at the 3 spot at times, but I have to say wasn't the best start for Javon Porter, and a guy that, to be brutally honest with you, I wasn't the biggest fan of the signing. So hopefully we'll see a little bit more from him this offseason. But I just basically listed 10 guys there. So that leaves 4 more players who I think probably are not going to get regular minutes this season. First of all, Trent Burns. Quite simply, I'm just going to believe it when I see it with him. Didn't play at all last season because of injury. Now he's out the first few weeks this season as well. Hey, I like a 7-foot guy who can shoot in theory, but I need to see it in reality at some point. And then Aaron Rowe, Nicholas Randall, a couple of true freshmen. Just too much experience on this team to see them getting realistic minutes. And kind of the same thing with Luke Northweather, too, who has some experience, obviously, with Oklahoma. But I just don't see him necessarily playing a ton of minutes. Maybe he's able to work his way ahead of Javon Porter, ahead of Trent Pierce, Jacob Cruz potentially. That's about it. I'd say, 8th, 9th man for any of those guys is probably the biggest possible upside you can see. But if I had to bet on it, I don't think any of those 4 guys is going to play significant minutes for Missouri. But hey, tell me what you think in the comments. Hit us in the tittus, as they say on another podcast. But hey, thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou as always. And until next time, I'll see you right here.